so happy we alive.
Good evening, and welcome to Louisville Late Night. This evening we're in beautiful San Francisco, California.
Closed ward, TV sets, they had plenty of everything, but they tested their urines every day for as long as it took until their urines were clear, and it stayed clear for a week. All right. There was no way any dope was getting into the lab. And then they kept them for 3 weeks after that. After they had smoked, actually it was a double-blind crossover, so both people got the 1.75% or the 3.55% standard night of joint, as it's referred to. Now, I gather, but I don't personally know because the subject really isn't of that much interest to me, that 3.55 is still wimpy, but I don't believe any numbers like 20%, although I did get a call from I don't know, a year ago, and he managed to produce 26% stuff on the government farm. And he wondered what kind of experiments. Actually, they're looking at making suppositories, I think, for cancer chemotherapy patients. Total of, so they give them a standard joint and then followed the urine by screening and by gas chromatography, which has a much lower level of ability to detect. And the half-life for a low-dose joint is 31.5 hours. And for the high dose, it's 26.8 hours. That's how long you can expect to see the marijuana metabolite in the urine, even if you're a regular marijuana smoker that has been clean, that's the word you want to use, who has not been smoking for a few weeks. And if you've been smoking 2 days before, you have issues, and you're probably going to exceed those boundaries. Here are the detection limits for marijuana, for THC in the urine that they found in this really well-controlled study. You can set your analyzer. It really doesn't matter whether it's a screening test analyzer or the gas chromatograph, but you can set it for certain levels of detection. Today's machines can detect far lower levels than anything on this chart. But if you make an arbitrary cutoff decision and you say, I'm going to call anything below 100 nanograms negative, then a low-dose joint gives you a positive test for 5 days, and a high-dose joint for 1.5. Well, why would you do that? Well, because
they say it's predicated on it must be a double-blind study, preferably a double-blind, multi-institutional study. Can you tell me the most credible double-blinded study that you know of, whether you conducted it yourself or whether others have conducted it?
The concept of having a double-blind study is, in many instances, irrelevant. And trying to insist on the double-blind study is antithetical to most of clinical medicine. Clinical medicine doesn't work that way. The aggregation of different conditions may be useful for certain instances, but for others is totally irrelevant. For example, rare conditions where there may be just a few hundred in the whole world, and when there are significant effects with cannabis used to treat this. There are no such things as double-blind. It's meaningful in that it's had this effect on this illness, period. And having the condition and the case findings stand on themselves is the way medicine always has been. For example, I'm sure you've probably never heard of the condition called atrophy blanche. Atrophy blanche is a rare autoimmune condition that causes platelets in certain capillary beds to sludge, causing stoppage, causing then breakdown of the tissue, which then results in intractable infections that don't respond to usual kinds of treatment. There are probably about 150 in the world. Where are you going to find a double-blind kind of study involving cases like this? To insist upon double-blind studies is to ignore the way medicine has been practiced over the millennia. I say this because certain kinds of conditions are constant over the years. In O'Shaughnessy's monumental monograph that he wrote in 1839, he cites a study, or rather a report of a case from the Persian literature of major depression recurrent serious, of a fakir who headed a monastery of self-chasteners of a certain kind of sect, and in the last years of his life discovered cannabis just by accident, and that completely cured his depression. He changed his countenance completely and gave up his self-chastening as a way of life, and insisted that his followers plant the herb around his tomb after he died. Now, this is, to my knowledge, the first description of a chronic, serious, recurrent depression. And this stands over hundreds of years.
I guess what I'm trying to get at with the film that I'm trying to make is to be able to speak to the most conservative of the medical community, the people that are the most against marijuana. What is the most credible scientific research that you know of, and is it double blind, or I guess anything that's occurred in the
Well,
last.
you seem to be obsessing on this concept of,
I'm obsessing on it.
of double blind because people have told you that this is important. And indeed it is important for certain phenomena, but totally irrelevant for others. And to insist that this is a blanket requirement is sheer folly and a way of covering up ignorance. That the tradition in medicine is watch one, do one, teach one. And that doesn't require double-blind studies for, like, hernia repair, or it doesn't take double-blind studies to determine whether or not aspirin will help bring down the fever. And to make this blanket insistence is simply a form of denial and unwillingness to accept other points of view or be clinicians. So many physicians have forgotten because they've been seduced by the darker force of Big Farm and the monomolecular madness that we're living under. The patent office has probably killed off more people by letting out patents for these Me Too molecules that then turn out to be toxic, like the Vioxx fiasco, like the Baycol fiasco that described certain very toxic reactions to the cholesterol-lowering drugs. And this brings up the credibility of different kinds of so-called scientific presentations. Back in February 25th of 2005, I took in a panel on C-SPAN that was a description of how the Oregon Health Sciences University Center for Evidence